The reading of today's reading from Rays of One Light has the theme of perfection is self-transcendence. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. We start this week with a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. If ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even pagans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. This teaching is a continuation of last week's lesson. To love all equally is possible only by seeing God everywhere, in others as well as in oneself. See whatever comes to you unasked for as a manifestation of His will. Be grateful for the pains you experience, for they are healing strokes of His love. Sometimes healing is effected only by strong measures, but His love for you is manifested in the very attempt to heal. Strive always to be impersonal, as though whatever happens to you were happening to someone else. Persecution gives us the supreme opportunity to deny the thought, this is happening to me, and to affirm our inner freedom from that thought of ego. Don't allow the negative perceptions of others to become your own self-definition. Seek God. This is the true goal of life. Though how difficult to climb to it in the midst of hatred, spite, and persecution, the Bhagavad Gita tells us in the 7th chapter, out of thousands, one strives for spiritual attainment. And out of many blessed true seekers who strive assiduously to reach me, one perhaps perceives me as I am. O truth seeker, be one among all those thousands who seek the supreme goal. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
So, as I said, I'm sorry I was distracted. Let me start over. It's a joy to share this Sunday service with you and be with you all. It's really magical that we can do this online, as many things as we are doing at this time. So to begin the service here, I would like to read from Master's Book of Prayer Poems and Demands, Whispers from Eternity. This one is number 46, Let Me Feel That Thou and I Are One. When the sparks of cosmic creation flew from under thy crucible of love, I danced with all the lights that heralded the coming of a myriad worlds. I am a little spark of thy joyous cosmic fire. O thou sun of life, as thy nectar poured into the little cups of human minds, filled with molten liquid of vital sparks, they thought to contain thy golden infinity in the smallness of human feelings. In each fragile, undulating mirror of human flesh, I see reflected thy restless dance of omnipresent power. In the lambent waters of life I behold thy ever-steady, almighty life. Teach me, Christ-like, by the power of concentration, to still the restless storms of my desires raging on the lake of my mind. Stilling those waters, I lovingly behold thy unruffled face of cosmic stillness. Cause the little wave of my life to subside, that thy consciousness in me spread out to become thine own vastness. Let me feel my heart throbbing in thy breast, my feet moving with thy energy, thy breath breathing through mine, thy energy actively moving my arms and legs, thy thoughts weaving all the thoughts in my brain. When I cry, thy soft sigh within me wakens me to thy joy. In thy playfulness, little bubble visions of thy creation float dancingly in the chamber of my dreams, which manifest in my sleep of delusion. Thy meteoric will courses through the skies of my own willpower. Make me feel that it is thou who art I. Oh, make me thyself, that I behold my little bubble of self ever floating in thee. Amen. It's a beautiful prayer poem of Master's. And it's one of those where you always feel like, okay, we don't need to talk anymore. We just need to embrace and digest and realize what Master has just said to us. This, as Swamiji said in the reading, this week's reading, is a segue from last week. Last week, the topic was, how high should we aspire? And this week, perfection is self-transcendence. So how high should we aspire? To perfection. It's a very challenging reading. Because when we hear perfection, it's the ultimate. It's the goal. And we are still on the journey. So how do we work with this perfection and still maintain our determination and willpower and not be discouraged from trying for perfection? I think of, Olympic athletes, for an example. They work and work and work and work and work to go to the Olympics. And in that training and the races, or whatever it is their discipline is, their sport, they must lose a lot as much as they win a lot in the ascent up to the Olympics. If they get discouraged, it doesn't help them, it hurts them. I remember reading an Olympic ice skater. She said, the hardest thing was doing anything in my hometown or near my hometown when my family and friends would come and watch. That would be when I'd make the most mistakes because I wanted it to be perfect for them, and I tried in the wrong way to make it right. And she said I'd make mistakes. Self-consciousness. It makes us self-conscious. And especially it makes us self-conscious when we think, I'm not perfect. And there are certain areas where we're much, much, much less than perfect, as well as things where we are doing well. So it's very, very important for us to keep our determination, our courage, as Swamiji said in the reading. We are here because we're not perfect. In other words, it's only the ego protecting itself that makes a big thing of our not already being perfect. God and the Masters know that we're not perfect and love us here and now, which is a great encouragement to keep trying to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, as Christ said. He knew he was talking to imperfect people, but he's asking us, just see me at the end of the journey and keep coming toward me. And especially, I think, devotees on the spiritual path who are trying very sincerely in these ways can be too self-conscious about their faults and their failings. And it's the exact opposite. The ego's promptings are always to have us contract and not to expand. The famous story that Master Swami tells in the Path about a man at Mount Washington who left, or a woman, I don't know which story it was, but he came back after about 3 years, and people said, aren't you ashamed of coming back? Aren't you, ashamed to show yourself when you gave up, essentially, and left the path? And the person said, man or woman said back, what do you want me to do? Worship my mistakes? It's a very good answer. What others think of us isn't that important. What we think of ourselves and God is important. And so what I'm trying to say here is we don't need to protect ourselves from the ego. We need to transcend it, to overcome it. We don't need to protect ourselves from others. We need to overcome our desire to believe what people say or think. Because what each ego does, mine, yours, and everyone else's, is look at what's wrong with everyone, with me. And the soul wants to look at what's right. The soul nature is transcendent, overlooks, to move toward divine qualities of love, of compassion, of forgiveness. So perfection is self-transcendence because we're not looking anymore at the least of things. We're looking at the highest in each other, in ourselves. And that's what remembering God is all about. What would I do in this moment, in the beautiful song that Swami sung, which is St. Francis's poem? Make me an instrument of your peace. Help me to be your instrument, to love others instead of hate them, to understand instead of always wanting to be understood myself. You understand, you know what this is. We have to do the opposite of what the ego is nudging us to do. The ego, again, wants to limit, wants to see the negative, wants to point out what's wrong. The soul, no. So we don't give in to the ego. We ask for the soul to come through us. In the life of Corrie ten Boom, who we've told stories about this family before, the ten Booms. They're a Christian family in Holland, Haarlem, in Holland, in World War II. And they helped Jews to hide from the Nazis. And a neighbor denounced them to the Nazis, and they were taken. And Corrie and her sister, Betsy, were two unmarried, not elderly, middle-aged, maybe 55 or so, women, very devout, and Betsy particularly was incredibly saintly. And they are put in the concentration camp of Ravensbrück, which was a women's concentration camp. And the horror and the brutality that they saw there was, well, we can only imagine what it was. Corrie slowly began to lose her faith and trust in God. She got angrier and angrier as the years went on. And one time she watched a Nazi guard attack her sister and beat her very brutally because she couldn't do the work. She was not very well physically. And she was so angry that she refused to pray with her sister from then on, and fought her to stop asking her to do, because God shouldn't have put us in this and I can't deal with it. But of course her sister slowly changed her mind. Many years later, Corrie was on a panel of people that had been in concentration camps during the Nazi regime. And she talked in front of an audience, as did others. And one of the people in the audience said, watching her and watching the others made me realize this woman has something that we could all use to help us in life. And that was her faith and her trust in God. The other people, and there's no judgment here whatsoever, going through something like that, and what I can only imagine. And how people respond is very individual. So if they have lost their faith or they can't overcome what they went through, God bless them. That's all there is to say. But this person saw in Corrie this power and this strength, and so went up to her and said, would you be willing to write a book about your experiences and go around the world talking about your experiences, because you have something that is very powerful for all. So Corrie agreed and wrote the book, The Hiding Place, and went touring around the world. This is probably several years after the end of World War II, so in the 50s. In one of her talks, she was talking in Berlin, Germany. And while she's talking, she sees in the back of the room a man who was one of the prison guards at Ravensbrück. And after her she was talking about forgiveness. God knows what to do with us at any given time. So at the end of her talk, this man came up to her. And he said, I was at Ravensbrück, I was a guard. And she said, I know. And he said, since then I have become a Christian. I ask God to forgive me, and I know in my heart that I am forgiven. But I also ask God, it's going to be hard to say, this whole thing is so moving. I also asked God to help me find someone in the camp I was in who I can ask to forgive me also. That's very important for me. And he said, I've been praying for a long time, and I heard about you being here in Berlin today, and here I am. Can you forgive me? Well, Corrie says that all she could feel in that moment was a blazing hatred. in her heart. That there's no way can I forgive this creep and what he did to my sister. I think he was the one that beat her sister. So at that moment when she felt this intense hatred, she called on God, Christ, please, please, please help me, in her heart, because I can't do this. I know you can, but I can't. And at that moment, Romans, a quote from Romans from the Bible, 5:5, Romans 5:5 came into her heart, into her mind. Let me see if I remember. Well, I've got it written. The love of God has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, who was given to us by God. And she said, immediately, I felt this overwhelming power of love and peace come over me. And I reached out my hand automatically and she shook his hand. She took his hand in both of hers. And she said, brother, I forgive you. And he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I heard Corey talk about this on YouTube. It's long ago now. And at the end of the talk, at the end of that story, she said, can you forgive? Because you don't know the power and greatness of God's love until you have forgiven an enemy, a true enemy. Can you forgive? No? Well, he can through you. Do you understand that it's never us, the ego, that is working with this. It's the soul trying to draw the power of God through us, through the ego, in fact. Remember, Master said, the ego is the soul identified with the body. The ego is the soul identified with the body. That means the body, the personality, the feelings, the emotions. So whenever, especially whenever, there is an intense one, like the hatred Kari felt in that moment, we have to call, that's the trigger, that's the impulse to call on God. God, help me, because I don't know what to do. In fact, I can't do it, but you can. And that faith and that power of prayer is a magnet for God's love immediately. She asked, he came, and she was able to forgive. You know, we and the ego hold on subconsciously, consciously to old hurts and old resentments. And when Master talks about it, it's Sri Yukteswar, forget the past. The lives of all men are dark with many shames. Everything in future will improve if you make the right spiritual effort now. But forget the past, and it's literally the subconscious that carries those memories, those hurts, those seething resentments within us. It's seated in the medulla, in the subconscious mind. It is behind us. Literally, forget the past. And what do? We move forward. We come to the spiritual eye, the soul, the ego, the superconscious, the subconscious, and we move forward in the power of God's light and grace. Give those things to divine will, to divine guidance, to the divine light. Don't, easy to say, but don't hold on to the past. Or if you are holding on, as Kari was, obviously, in that moment, make that a powerful, impetus to say, help me, I need you. I need you right now. Come through me, help me to deal with this man and get rid of this hatred and lack of forgiveness. And God opens our hearts when we do that. the movement toward how can I transcend these horrible feelings without repressing them is in that request, because in the request to God to help, we are acknowledging the power of our own limitation. Excuse me. In other words, in that moment, Kari said, I can't do it. She didn't pretend that she could. She knew she wasn't doing it. Look at the difference. When we pretend or try, but we're still feeling hatred or lack of forgiveness, that's us repressing. We are denying what's going on. She acknowledged, I'm full of hatred. I can't forgive this guy. He's a murderer. He's a thug. But she asked for God's help with that. That's the difference. That's what we have to change for ourselves. Swamiji once said he actually said it several times in my hearing. I never let how others treat me affect how I feel about them. I never let how others treat me affect how I feel about them. When we do that, when we do allow how others treat us to affect how we feel about them, we have just gone where they are. The very thing that we don't like about how they're treating us, we are now doing back to them. So, transcendence in a sentence. I never let how others treat me affect how I feel about them. Very, very powerful statement. And Master in the autobiography talked about how Sri Yukteswar, we've all read it, how Sri Yukteswar was so stern and uncompromising in his discipline, and how the ego reacts. Here's one of the things that Master said. I'm just bringing in here Master and Swami talking about this topic. Master said that at a certain point, he demolished the wall of realization and subconscious reservation that the ego hides behind. Yes, I will. I'm going to. And again, and again. Master said that at a certain point, I tore down the wall of rationalization and subconscious reservation. Like resistance, that the ego hides behind. Okay? Shall I say it again? Okay? Because it doesn't hurt us to hear this 10 times, never mind 3. Master said that at a certain point, he demolished the wall of rationalization and subconscious resistance that the ego hides behind. So again, we see that we think we're open, and yet there's a part of us resisting, putting in reserve what the masters, what the great teachers of the ages and great scriptures of the ages are telling us over and over again. That how we react, how we feel, doesn't have anything to do with anything external. Remember last week, anyone that saw, if you're watching, I talked about the little sadhu that talked about ego-ji and soul-ji. It's a good way to think of these two parts of ourselves, because it's respectful and open rather than the ego bad, the soul good. It's not quite that way, because the ego is our instrument, but it will lead you astray if you contract. The minute you feel contraction, resistance, no, I don't. See the tension here? Yeah, you do. Because what we'll do is the ego, you don't do that. Yeah, you don't have to listen to that. So Master's saying he even did that with Sri Yukteswar, and he remembers the moment when it changed. We have to be open to God here and now, as we are. We say in English, warts and all. I'm going to explain. There's a famous painting of Oliver Cromwell, who had a lot of bumps all over his face. You know, like warts. Yes, esatto. And when the man was coming to paint him, he said, I want you to be truthful. I want you to paint me warts and all. He wanted reality. Don't pretend I don't have them. I do. So we have to stand before God in that same uncovered, no hiding way, and ask God, please help me make this instrument purer, clearer. Help me to forgive. Help me to be kind. Help me to help others. I don't know why my throat keeps fading away, but it does. So what can we do in the effort to become more perfect? It's always in the little things. I mean, all of us probably have something major or big that has happened to us that is something that maybe bothers us continuously. And that's something we have to keep returning to and trying to overcome. But in the little things, in the small things of life, in the small moments of life, we have to try to work with ourselves, work to overcome. So, I was saying I talked a lot already about forgiveness.
Dicevo che ho parlato molto sul tema del perdono.
And I want to say a little bit more about what we can do.
E vorrei solo aggiungere qualcosa su che cosa possiamo fare.
Swamiji said we cannot find self-transcendent in one big leap.
E Swami ha detto che non possiamo avere e trovare la trascendenza, il trascendere il nostro ego in un salto unico.
We have to make choices moment to moment.
Dobbiamo fare delle scelte un momento dopo l'altro.
And be kind in the face of unkindness. This is still Swamiji.
Ed essere gentile
in front of
di fronte alla non gentilezza.
These are the building blocks toward transcendence.
E questi sono i mattoni per costruire la trascendenza.
So we want to use those moments to free the soul from the bondage of the ego.
Per cui vogliamo usare quei momenti proprio per liberare l'anima dalla stretta dell'ego.
Swamiji mentioned kindness.
E Swami ha menzionato la gentilezza.
He also mentions humor.
Ha anche menzionato l'umore.
The ability to laugh at ourselves in our imperfection is a very healthy state of mind.
La capacità di ridere di noi stessi, della nostra imperfezione, è proprio una cosa sana.
Exactly. And of course forgiveness I've talked a lot about.
E anche il perdono, come ho parlato.
And finally, surrender to God.
E finalmente l'arrendersi a Dio.
Every week in the Festival of Light,
Ogni settimana nella cerimonia della luce
we say, surrender to me and your strength will be renewed.
diciamo arrenditi a me e la tua forza sarà rinnovata.
And I want to end with this very short quote from the Bhagavad Gita.
E vorrei finire con una frase della Bhagavad Gita.
This is Krishna talking to Arjuna,
È Krishna che parla ad Arjuna,
God talking to all of us.
Dio che parla a tutti noi.
O Arjuna,
O Arjuna,
O devotee, O disciple,
o devoto discepolo,
there is but one self,
c'è solo un sé
dwelling in all, living in all.
che vive in tutti noi.
That self is inviolable,
Quel sé è inviolabile,
which means it cannot be harmed.
che vuol dire nessuno le può ferire.
Have no grief, therefore,
Abbi nessun dolore per cui,
for anything that happens outwardly
per niente che succede esternamente
in this manifested world.
in questo mondo manifesto.
You have but one self
Hai solo un sé
that cannot be touched by anything.
che è intoccato da nulla.
Move closer to that self
Muoviti sempre più vicino a quel sé
and surrender yourself to God.
e affidati a Dio.
Oh, Amen. God bless you all.
Benedizioni a tutti.